Assalamualaikum, my name is Arfa and welcome to a brand new video. In today's video, I have three books to recommend. I have three books to recommend, and these were written by Unitarian Christians. The Unitarian Christians' work has not been represented or recommended a lot in the community, and so I would like to recommend some of their works. I use these literatures as references, and so I've not read them cover to cover, but I've read one book from cover to cover, and it is a very important book. The other two I use as references for my research. And so the first one that I've read cover to cover is The Doctrine of the Trinity by Sir Anthony Buzzard and Charles F. Hunting. I've made recommendations about this in the past, and I want to recommend it again. This is a very, very important work. The whole idea of this video is not for me to convince other people you have the right and you are entitled to believe what you want to believe, but I'm offering you these literatures so that you can actually hear from the other side, hear what other sides have to say, and hear why Unitarians reject the divinity of Jesus. Right? The Unitarians do not believe that Jesus is actually part of the Trinity. Jesus is not God. Some Unitarians say that Jesus is divine, but he is divine in a sense whereby he is the Messiah. Right? So he is not divine as in he is part of the Trinity or he is God even. No, so his status is simply the Messiah. And Messiah basically means the anointed one, right? Or the appointed one by God, or appointed by the community, right? Which also appointed by God if you read the Hebrew Bible. And so this is the doctrine of the Trinity. He goes into a lot of the different chapters, and I've made videos about this in the past, but he talks about all these passages that the Trinitarians use to actually argue for the divinity of Jesus, and this book argue against the divinity of Jesus using the same passages. And so it is interesting to see the different sides of the argument, and just so that you know, I have no take in this. I'm not a Christian, right? But I am open to listening and hearing and research, try to be as fair as possible on both sides. But obviously we all have our own theological biases, but we have to at least open up ourselves and hear the other sides, what the other sides have to say, and we have to actually understand the argument. We cannot just brush off the argument just because we don't understand the argument. So we need to acknowledge the argument, and if we don't understand the argument, we have to find ways to understand the argument. Because in the past, I used to brush off arguments because I just cannot fathom them, but it turns out that I was wrong, and the arguments, once you understood them, make sense, and it changed your whole perspective. And so that is the important thing about reading. Sometimes you read a work one or twice, you don't understand, and so as you read more, you find ways, you find out the problem why you don't understand, right? It could be that you lack foundational knowledge for you to be able to fathom the author's argument. And so once you fill up yourself with this foundational knowledge, then you revisit the argument again, and then you finally get it. And once you got it, it changed your perspective. And so that is the challenge, and so that is something that is done through reading. I will recommend you background information for you to understand the different arguments that is being presented here, right? Because these works were all written under the assumption that you have foundational knowledge, right? The next one is probably a lot of you know the Restitution by Zali, Kermit Zali. And so the argument that I've read in here, it goes through the passages again, similar, like the spirit, so on and so forth. Similarly, it goes through the argument that Trinitarians use, and why it can be used against them actually. And so using the same argument, you have two different conclusions, and these are legit approach, right? They're not misrepresenting the other side. And so I'm always raving about this kind of works, and always recommending people these works, so that they can actually find out for themselves, instead of actually, always give in to your biases, because you need to be able to defend yourself, but you need to be able to defend yourself based on research from both sides, so that you are fair. It's the same. So Kermit Zali, the restitution, for me this is a reference. This is more of a reference, because Trinitarians, how I use this work is that Trinitarians would use certain passages, the Philippian passages in Paul chapter 2, in Philippians chapter 2. And so I will go to all these different literatures, to the commentaries. This is topical monograph, I would call it that way. And so I will go to it and look at the author's interpretation of that text, right? Based on the background context of the Greco-Roman world, then you have to find ways to understand the exegesis of the authors that you read on a certain passages, right? And so, for example, there's Christians who say that Jesus was born miraculously. Some Trinitarians say that Jesus was born miraculously, and so he does not have a father, and so his father is actually God, right? And so there are chapters in here about the virgin birth, or conception of Jesus, as to why it doesn't mean that Jesus is actually God, right? Because Adam do not have a father and mother, right? So the restitution, biblical proof: Jesus is not God, right? Jesus is not God. And so Trinitarian Christians, you have to read this, right? If your belief is strong, and you still believe in the Trinity after reading this, well, at least you give it a shot, right? If only it will affirm your faith. But do look at these literatures fairly. And yeah, the next one, the last one for today, is the God of Jesus in light of Christian dogma, right? Keegan A. Chandler. The back text: does Jesus have a God? This is, I find it, the Trinitarians will find it provoking, right? But it is not meant to do that. It is meant to open up one's, or to gain one's attention. It's the same approach as to these other books that I've recommended. It goes through the passages that the Trinitarians used to argue for the divinity of Christ, and actually dismantle it, and demonstrate as to why these passages does not support the divinity of Jesus. And so, yep, does Jesus have a God? And so, let me recommend you background context that would actually help you understand, or should help you understand actually, the world behind the authors of the New Testament, right? This is under the assumption, or the presupposition actually, that these authors were actually inspired, okay, by the Holy Spirit, right, which is the evangelical view. But even though these authors were inspired by the Holy Spirit, in order for the community around them to understand this message, right, they can only understand it through the Greco-Roman lens, because that is the worldview, that is the environment, that is the social context that the community of these gospel authors that is pretty much the only thing that they are aware of consciously. And so they're not living in Egypt, for example. They're not living in Mesopotamia. They're living in Canaan, in Asia Minor, in Crete, in Cyprus. All these are bounded by the Greco-Roman philosophy, the Greco-Roman ideologies, right? Cults even. And so these were the world of the mind, right, that is available to them. And so literatures will definitely be written in this light. And so the first things first is Everett Ferguson, backgrounds of early Christianity. He goes through the philosophy, he goes through the theology, right? He also has a chapter on the Roman generals and emperors and so forth, which you can probably skip. I would recommend you go straight to the philosophy and the Greco-Roman religion towards the middle section, towards the later end of the book, and read the different philosophy, the Sophists, the Epicureans, and so forth, the Platonists, Neoplatonists, and so forth. And that give you an understanding, right? Because you do need to understand it, Greco-Roman philosophy, because the authors and the communities, right, they subscribe to a kind of philosophy. It is not homogeneous. It is not monolithic. It is homogeneous. For example, the Platonists is different from the Neoplatonists, right? The Sophists, Epicureans, they are all pretty much different from one another, but they do take elements from here and there, and then it became a movement in itself. And so not every philosophy were recorded down. We only have what we know today because of the things that survive, the manuscripts that survive, the writings. Some writings have not been copied by the Arabs, the Central Asians, and so it has been lost, right? In case you do not know, these writings were actually abandoned by the church, and it was later adopted by the Manichaean Christians in Central Asia. They started copying the text, and then people wanted these works and so forth, and so it was preserved in a sense this way. And so Everett Ferguson. The next literature is the World of the New Testament. The World of the New Testament. I've recommended this before. I'll recommend again. This is by Baker Academic. Read the chapter on philosophy, the Greco-Roman religion, the cult, and so on and so forth, because that gives you the immediate context that you need to be aware of, right? And that's pretty much what I use these books for, because as far as the other things are concerned, I use them in different books. So the philosophy. Now, if you just want an introduction to the Greco-Roman, even the archaic Greek philosophy, like you want to know the different Milesian and Ionian philosophy or schools, right? The Milesian became the Ionian, and also you want to know about the Pythagoreans and Neo-Pythagoreans and so forth, the different sages, the different philosophies, philosophical school, Anaximenes and so forth. You might think that all this is not relevant to the period of our concern, which is the New Testament period. But the New Testament period, or the authors of the New Testament and their communities, that they were actually within the boundaries, within the intellectual boundaries of the Greco-Romans, meaning they can only understand things through the Greco-Roman lens. And so we have to understand things, which is the New Testament. We have to understand the New Testament through the Greco-Roman lens. That will give us the accurate interpretation of these texts, because these texts, the New Testament, were written within the Greco-Roman world, and the authors only know things through the Greco-Roman lens. Enough said. one of the classics, Armstrong, An Introduction to Philosophy. This is the third edition. The first edition 1947, second 1957, and now 1977. A.H. Armstrong. Get the third edition. Do not get the first and second edition, because there's a lot of revision in the third edition, right? And so this gives you the theology of the Platonists, the Neoplatonists. What is the concept of logos, right? In the Gospel of John, a lot of people say that the logos is actually God, right? Or some say it is the wisdom of God, and it is God and with God. But what is this concept all about? Where does this all come from? It came from philosophy. It is not the invention of the author of the Gospel of John. No, this derives from all the way to the archaic Greek philosophy. Okay, from archaic Greek philosophy, you have the Greco-Roman philosophy, and then you have what you have today in the New Testament. And so, in order for you to understand what this logos, or this Sophia, right, this wisdom, and so forth, what is the concept of all this? You find this as well in the wisdom book. So what is all this Jewish concept of wisdom? Did the Jews invent this concept, or did this concept derive from philosophy, ancient philosophy? Right? It is all from philosophy, and so you need to understand philosophy so that you can actually understand what logos is about, and why the authors that I'm recommending here, right? Why they do not find it convincing that the Trinitarian argument, whereby the logos is God, it is the Word of God, or three in one, so on and so forth. They do not find it convincing, because if you read their works, right, philosophically, none of the philosophers believe that this is actually the God, right, which is the Trinitarian beliefs. The God, there are three persons and one being. That is the God. Whereas even the philosophers like Pythagoras, believe that there's only one God, right? Even though their concept is bounded within Greek mythology, right, whereby you have families of gods, right, and each different god have control over the sea, over the thunder, over farmlands, and so forth, right? But they are not the God, right? And the Roman pagan religion as well, they believe that there are many different kinds of divine entities, roaming spirits, demons, daimones, right? Even human beings can become God. Even their Roman emperor can become God. But this doesn't mean that they are the God that is supreme. And so I challenge you, if you believe that Jesus is God, I challenge you to engage with these literatures, or you don't have to buy necessarily. You can go to the library. In fact, if I recommend you books from now on, and even in the past, I'm not actually asking you to buy them, right? One thing that I want to clear up is I am no way affiliated with any of the books that I have, and I've rejected affiliations in the past, and I will continue to do so. I don't need. Actually, I don't want any affiliations with any body and any publishers, and so forth. And I do not want I do not accept people sending me literatures to review. And so Yep, so I don't accept them. And so for those who have written emails in the past, you know that I don't actually want your books. Right? If I want, I'll pay my own money to get them. Right? And so I do not want to have anything to do with all these things, these entities, and so forth. And so that is the video for today, ladies and gentlemen. I will completely so just to finish off my thought here, don't buy them just because I show them to you on these videos. In these videos, don't buy them. Find ways to get access to them without having to pay any money. And the best thing is your local library if they have it. If not, then find other ways. But ladies and gentlemen, academia, I've been using academia. I've been writing articles on academia, writing articles, publishing them on academia. And recently I finished writing another article, but I need to check them, so on and so forth. I'm also writing something also, just to keep on putting contents on academia. And so I will not be able to make a lot of videos that I've made in the past, and so there'll be some days whereby I will not make videos for a period of time. I do not schedule my videos. People's they're just to get into the YouTube algorithm. I couldn't care about all this. I upload and film whenever I want, and so that is the channel, and that is just the way I roll. So I'm not really into this algorithm kind of thing. And in fact, a lot of my videos are not even tagged, and so that is you get what you see. And so I'm no way, again, just to clear things up, I'm no way affiliated with anyone, any publishers, and so forth. And I rejected a lot, not a lot actually. I rejected not publishers, but companies that sell books, and they try and reach out to me. And so I do not want to have anything to do with anyone. First things first. And secondly, just because I recommend you these books doesn't mean you have to buy them. Right? These are just my opinions. I use them because they support the things that I do, like writings and so forth. Right? But the best approach is find the literatures that is relevant to your topic. If you want to research about history of Judaism, then focus on history of Judaism. But also, history of Judaism is huge. What do you want to know? And once you start narrow it down, you'll find that you do not need to actually spend on any literatures. Right? If you're doing just for your own knowledge and so forth, it's not that you are in academia and you need to have all these literatures and so forth. The fact is you don't need, because all these resources are available online. Maybe the things that you need are not secondary sources. The things that you need are primary sources, and primary sources, ancient Greek philosophy, so on and so forth, they are online, available online. The translation might not be great and so forth, but at least you get the gist of it, right? Even people that actually know how to read Greek, for example, like for myself, I know a little bit about Greeks and so forth. I know a little bit Greek. I know little Greek. But for me to actually say that this translation is crooked, meaning that I need to analyze every single verse in these literatures, and no one actually has the time to do that. Right? And so you read and you get certain extent, even if it's not accurate, but the context should put you in a place whereby you will not deviate too much, or you will not deviate at all, right? And so once you understand the philosophy of that era, for example, then you can read the text, and the translation might not be accurate, but because you have foundational knowledge, you correct yourself, right? You'll probably realize, even without knowing Greek, that this is actually not an accurate translation, right? It sounds counterintuitive and strange and so forth, but once you have a lot of foundational knowledge, which is very important, you can actually spot an idea that is mistaken to that era, right? It could be due to a mistranslation, or even the authors from that era, the philosophers of that era, right? They themselves are actually incorrect about the era that they are actually writing about, the philosophy. For example, if you read primary sources, there are some philosophers that actually, or historians that actually do not actually understand the philosophy, even if it's in their own period, right? They're not per se contemporaries with these philosophers, right? But they not necessarily always represent these philosophers correctly. For example, everything that we know about the archaic Greek philosophy, right, goes back to Aristotle, about the sages, Thales, Anaximenes, Pythagoras. We know them because of Aristotle, and then later historian quotes Aristotle, and some actually misrepresent. And the thing is, we don't know. Have Aristotle misrepresented this philosophy or these philosophers? We don't know, right? And so what you read is what you get, but know that this is history, and there's no corroboration between different sources, and so that is the only thing that you get. It can be true, it might not be true, right? So this is history, and so that is something that you need to appreciate, right? And so it could be that in the past, we don't know, right, that Aristotle actually misrepresented the different schools, right? And so, ladies and gentlemen, the same goes to our New Testament. And so if you have enough foundation, you know that when the author of the Gospel of John or Mark, for example, mention Jesus as the Messiah, they do not have at the back of their mind Jesus is God. And the author of John do not have at the back of his mind that Jesus is actually the God, or even the Trinity, right? Once you understand philosophy, you start to see that these authors were actually writing through a philosophical lens. Then you really know what they are actually writing about. They are not actually trying to tell us that God is three persons and one being, right? And so that is not the concept that they have, and this is what these authors are actually trying to inform the Trinitarian Christians as to why their interpretation of these verses in the Bible are actually incorrect. Because if you go back to the primary literature, right, if you understand these philosophers, this philosophical school or thought, thinking, whatever it is you want to call it, you'll never interpret the Gospels or even Paul as suggesting and implying that God is three persons and one being. And the accusation or the refutation that I would say that I can't think of any word, not accusation, but probably the disagreement is that the Trinitarian Christians do not actually have strong foundation on philosophy. But then again, Trinitarian Christians, a lot of Christians are Trinitarian today, not because they do not understand the Greek philosophy. A lot of Trinitarian Christians do not understand Greek philosophy. They are just the awam, they are just the lay people, and they don't see the need to look at all these different philosophies, so on and so forth. And so this video is trying to, or actually this author is trying to tell them, is that hey, you do need to have foundational knowledge, or else your exegesis, your personal interpretation of the text of scripture, right, is out of context, right? Not in terms of narrative, but in terms of the philosophy, in terms of the thought, the thinking, in terms of the cultural background. And so a lot of Trinitarians whose videos that I've watched, they say that, oh, I'm not misquoting this verse out of context. I've read to you 10 verses before and 10 verses after. But what these authors are actually trying to say is that, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to tell you that you read 10 verses before and 10 verses after, but you read it through a Trinitarian lens. And that is where you go wrong. You have to read it through a Greco-Roman lens, right? And then you get the right interpretation. And so this is what these authors have been trying to say. That is what they have been arguing. And unfortunately, the Trinitarians, the videos that I've watched, obviously I'm not generalizing this, the videos that I've watched, they misrepresent the arguments proposed by the Unitarians. And so, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I have for you today. My name is Arfat. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.